A hard-working barista risked everything to give a glass of water to an elderly veteran and his exhausted service dog. Her heartless boss fired her on the spot, but neither of them knew who that frail old man really was, and minutes later, military boots would shake the cafe floor. The morning rush at the Sapphire Brew was a chaotic symphony of hissing espresso wands, clinking porcelain, and the low, wealthy hum of downtown executives negotiating over $6 lattes. Located in the most affluent district of the city, the cafe prided itself on an atmosphere of exclusive perfection. The floors were polished marble, the lighting was a carefully curated amber, and the clientele expected nothing less than flawless, uninterrupted service. Behind the sleek mahogany counter stood Hannah. She was 22, running on 4 hours of sleep and desperately trying to keep up with the endless line of demanding customers. Hannah was in her 3rd year of nursing school, and every single shift at the Sapphire Brew was a lifeline. She needed the wages to pay for her textbooks, her cramped studio apartment, and the mounting tuition bills that hung over her head like a dark cloud. She was a meticulous worker, always ensuring every cup was perfect, but she operated under a constant, suffocating blanket of anxiety. That anxiety was largely due to her manager, Gregory. Gregory was a man who seemed entirely devoid of human empathy, replacing it instead with a terrifying obsession for corporate aesthetics. He wore impeccably tailored suits that seemed entirely out of place for a coffee shop manager, and he spent his days prowling the floor, looking for the slightest imperfection. A spilled grain of sugar, a barista smiling too casually, or a customer who didn't fit the upscale vibe of his establishment were all met with harsh, humiliating reprimands. Gregory ruled the cafe through intimidation, and Hannah knew that she was always one minor mistake away from losing the job she so desperately needed. Outside the floor-to-ceiling tinted windows, it was a punishing, sweltering mid-July afternoon. The heat index had soared past 95 degrees, and the pavement shimmered with relentless urban heat. The heavy glass door of the cafe chimed, breaking the rhythmic hum of the morning rush. Through the doorway stepped a man who immediately disrupted Gregory's carefully maintained aesthetic. It was an elderly gentleman, frail and weathered, leaning heavily on a thick wooden cane. He wore a faded olive-green military jacket that was far too warm for the summer heat, decorated with a few frayed, indistinct patches that spoke of a lifetime of service long forgotten by the modern world. His face was a map of deep wrinkles, telling stories of harsh suns, difficult winters, and a quiet, enduring dignity. This was Harrison, an 82-year-old retired Marine. Walking slowly beside Harrison, panting heavily with his tongue lolling from the side of his mouth, was a large golden retriever mix. The dog wore a faded red vest with the words "Service Animal" embroidered in bold white lettering. The dog, whose name was Duke, looked just as exhausted as his master. The brutal summer heat had clearly taken a severe toll on both of them. Duke's paws clicked softly against the pristine marble floor as he expertly guided the old man out of the sun and into the blessedly cool air conditioning of the cafe. Harrison moved with agonizing slowness toward an empty table in the far corner, hoping only to catch his breath and escape the punishing sun for a few moments. Duke immediately circled once and collapsed heavily at Harrison's feet, letting out a long, shuddering sigh. From across the room, Gregory's eyes locked onto the pair like a hawk spotting prey. His face flushed with immediate outrage. "Absolutely not!" Gregory hissed under his breath, adjusting his silk tie as he marched briskly across the cafe floor. Hannah, who was in the middle of steaming milk for a cappuccino, paused. She watched Gregory's predatory approach and felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. She knew exactly what was about to happen. "Excuse me." Gregory snapped his voice sharp enough to cut glass, loud enough to turn the heads of several businessmen nearby. "You cannot bring that animal in here." Harrison looked up, his faded blue eyes, cloudy but calm. He took a slow, rattling breath before speaking in a voice that was soft, yet carried the unmistakable gravel of a man who had commanded respect in his youth. "I apologize for the intrusion, sir. We just need to sit for a moment. The heat out there. It's a bit much for an old man." "I don't care about the heat," Gregory replied, coldly crossing his arms. "This is a premium establishment, not a public kennel. We have strict health codes. You need to take your dog and leave, immediately." Harrison's hand trembled slightly as he patted Duke's head. The dog whined softly, pressing his nose against the veteran's knee. "He is a service dog," Harrison explained patiently, pointing a shaking finger at the red vest. "He is medically necessary. By law, he is permitted to accompany me." "I don't care what fake vest you bought online," Gregory sneered, his volume rising. "He is shedding on my marble floors, and he is disturbing my paying customers. You are not buying anything, which means you are loitering. Get out before I call the authorities." Behind the counter, Hannah felt her heart pounding against her ribs. She looked at the elderly man. She saw the pale, clammy sheen of sweat on his forehead. As a nursing student, she recognized the signs immediately. Harrison wasn't just tired. He was experiencing a severe drop in blood sugar, likely exacerbated by the extreme heat and dehydration. He was dangerously close to fainting. And Duke the service dog wasn't just resting, he was actively pressing against Harrison's leg, whining, performing a trained medical alert. "Gregory, please!" Hannah called out instinctively, abandoning her espresso station and stepping out from behind the counter. "He's clearly unwell. Let him stay just for a few minutes." Gregory whipped his head around his eyes, blazing with fury. "Hannah, get back to your station, now. This does not concern you. He's a veteran, Gregory," Hannah pleaded, taking another step forward. "And the dog is clearly a service animal. Look at the man, he's trembling. He just needs some water." "I said get back to work," Gregory barked, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I am the manager here. I decide who stays and who goes, and I want this filthy animal and this vagrant out of my shop." Harrison gripped his wooden cane, his knuckles turning white as he tried to push himself up from the chair. His legs shook violently. "It's all right, miss," Harrison said to Hannah, his voice barely a whisper. "We don't want to cause any trouble. Come on, Duke. Up, boy." Duke stood, but he kept his body pressed firmly against Harrison's legs, whining louder now, refusing to move forward. The dog knew his handler was in no condition to walk back into the 95-degree heat. Hannah couldn't take it anymore. The empathy that had driven her to nursing school completely overrode her fear of Gregory. She saw a man who had likely laid his life on the line for his country being treated like garbage by a man whose biggest hardship in life was a late delivery of artisanal syrup. Without a word to her manager, Hannah spun on her heel and rushed back behind the counter. Hannah moved with desperate purpose. She grabbed a large plastic cup, filled it to the brim with ice and filtered water, and snatched a clean ceramic bowl from the display shelf, filling it with water as well. From the pastry case, she pulled out a massive sugar-glazed blueberry muffin, the fastest source of carbohydrates she could find. "What are you doing?" Gregory shouted as Hannah marched back onto the floor, balancing the water, the bowl and the pastry in her hands. "I'm doing my job," Hannah said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I'm serving someone who needs help." She bypassed Gregory completely and knelt beside Harrison's table. She set the ceramic bowl on the floor for Duke, who immediately began lapping up the cool water with desperate enthusiasm. Then she placed the ice water and the muffin in front of Harrison. "Sir, please," Hannah said softly, looking up into his weathered face. "Drink this. Eat the muffin. It will help with the shaking. Your blood sugar is too low to be out in this heat. Harrison looked down at the food, then at the young woman kneeling beside him. A profound, unspeakable gratitude washed over his tired eyes. "Thank you, young lady," he whispered, his trembling hands reaching for the cold cup. "You are very kind." Before Harrison could take a sip, a shadow fell over the table. Gregory loomed over them, shaking with absolute, uncontrollable rage. The entire cafe had gone dead silent. The businessmen had stopped their conversations, their coffees suspended in mid-air. The only sound was the frantic lapping of Duke, drinking from his bowl. "Hannah," Gregory said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet, venomous pitch. "I gave you a direct order. I told you to throw them out, and instead you steal food from my display case to feed a beggar." "I'll pay for the muffin out of my tips," Hannah shot back, standing up to face him. She was inches shorter than Gregory, but she refused to back down. "He's not a beggar, he's a human being. And it's illegal to deny entry to a medical service, dog." "You are breaking the law, Gregory." Gregory let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "You don't lecture me about the law in my own store, you insolent little brat. I run this place. I set the standards. And my standard does not include filthy dogs and insubordinate staff." He reached out and violently snatched the muffin off the table, throwing it into a nearby trash can. Harrison flinched, clutching his cane tighter. "Hey!" Hannah yelled, her professional demeanor shattering. "You didn't have to do that." "I do whatever I want," Gregory spat, stepping so close to Hannah she could smell the peppermint on his breath. "And right now, I want you to take off that apron." "You are fired, Hannah." "Terminated immediately. Collect your pathetic things from the back and get out of my sight before I have security throw you out too." The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. Fired. The word echoed in her mind, instantly bringing forward the terrifying realities of her bank account. Her rent was due in 3 days. Her tuition installment was due next week. She had exactly $42 in her checking account. The panic rose in her chest, suffocating and cold. She looked at Gregory's smug, unyielding face, realizing there was no arguing with a man who possessed no heart. Slowly, her hands trembling as badly as Harrison's, she untied the heavy canvas apron from her waist. She placed it carefully on the mahogany table. "You're making a mistake, Gregory," Hannah said, her voice cracking tears of frustration, pricking the corners of her eyes. "The only mistake I made was hiring a bleeding heart amateur," Gregory retorted, loudly, ensuring the entire cafe heard him. "Now get out, both of you." Hannah didn't go to the back room to get her things. She couldn't bear to be in the building a second longer. Instead, she turned her attention back to Harrison. The old man was looking at her with an expression of profound sorrow. "My dear," Harrison croaked, trying to stand, "I am so incredibly sorry. You shouldn't have lost your livelihood over an old ghost like me." Hannah swallowed her tears and offered him her arm. "Don't apologize, sir. I wouldn't want to work for a man like that anyway. Let's get you outside. We'll find somewhere cooler to sit." With Hannah supporting his weight on one side and Duke walking dutifully on the other, the 82-year-old veteran made his slow, painful exit from the Sapphire Brew. Gregory stood with his hands on his hips, watching them go with a victorious smirk, feeling like a king who had successfully defended his castle. As the heavy glass door swung shut behind them, the oppressive heat hit Hannah like a physical wall. The pavement was radiating heat, and she could feel Harrison sagging against her arm. "There's a bus-stop bench down the block with some shade," Hannah said gently, holding on to the veteran. "Let's just make it there, okay?" "You are a good soldier, Hannah," Harrison whispered, patting her hand. They made the agonizingly slow trek down the block. When they finally reached the metal bench beneath the shadow of a large oak tree, Harrison practically collapsed onto it, exhausted. Duke curled up immediately under the bench, panting. Hannah sat beside him, the reality of her situation finally crashing down on her. She buried her face in her hands, trying desperately to hold back her tears. She had no job. She had no money. She had stood up for what was right, and the universe had punished her for it. Beside her, Harrison reached into the deep pocket of his worn military jacket. He pulled out an old, scuffed flip phone. His hands were still shaking, but there was a sudden sharp clarity in his eyes that hadn't been there inside the cafe. The cloudy fog of exhaustion had been replaced by the focused, unyielding steel of a man who had commanded battalions. He flipped the phone open and pressed a single speed dial button. He lifted the phone to his ear. "Wyatt!" Harrison said into the receiver. His voice was no longer a fragile whisper. It was firm, authoritative, and carried a dangerous weight. "It's Grandpa." Hannah lifted her head, wiping her eyes, watching the old man. "I'm fine," Harrison continued, his eyes narrowing, as he looked back down the street toward the gleaming windows of the Sapphire Brew. "But we had a bit of a situation down here, on 4th and Elm. Duke and I were just thrown out of a coffee shop, and the young lady who tried to give me a glass of water was fired for doing it." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Even from a few feet away, Hannah could hear the sudden sharp shift in tone coming through the tiny speaker, a heavy, booming voice vibrating with instant anger. "Yes," Harrison replied calmly. "The manager was incredibly disrespectful. I think he believes that because we are old and tired, we are helpless." Another pause. "Yes, Wyatt." Harrison said the faintest ghost of a smile touching the corners of his weathered mouth. "I'm at the bus stop down the street." "Bring the transport." And Wyatt Harrison looked directly at Hannah, his eyes shining with a fierce, protective light. "Bring your boys. I think someone in that establishment needs a reminder on how to treat the people who bleed for this city." Harrison snapped the flip phone shut. He looked at Hannah, who was staring at him in bewilderment. "Don't you worry about your rent, young lady," Harrison said softly, resting his hands on his cane. "My grandson is stationed at the base just 3 miles from here, and he is very, very protective of his grandfather." Less than 10 minutes later, the distant, unmistakable rumble of heavy diesel engines began to echo through the downtown corridor. The distant, unmistakable rumble of heavy diesel engines began to echo through the downtown corridor. The sound vibrated against the tall glass skyscrapers, a deep, guttural roar that felt entirely alien amidst the delicate clinking of porcelain and polite corporate chatter of the financial district. Hannah wiped her tear-streaked face, squinting down the sweltering, sun-baked street. She expected a standard sedan, maybe a pickup truck. She did not expect what turned the corner of 4th and Elm. 2 massive, sand-colored, joint-light tactical vehicles, their heavy armored plating gleaming under the brutal July sun, rolled deliberately down the avenue. They did not move with the frantic rush of city traffic. They moved with the undeniable heavy authority of a military convoy. The sheer size of the machines dwarfed the luxury sports cars parked along the curb. Pedestrians stopped dead in their tracks, lowering their cell phones, their eyes wide with confusion and awe, as the 2 tactical vehicles came to a sudden, synchronized halt directly in front of the Sapphire Brew. The hiss of air brakes shattered the quiet afternoon. The heavy armored doors swung open simultaneously. From the lead vehicle stepped a man who looked like he had been carved directly from granite. He wore a crisp, immaculate Marine Corps combat utility uniform, the sleeves rolled tightly around thick, heavily muscled arms. The silver oak leaf of a lieutenant colonel caught the sunlight on his collar. He was a towering figure, radiating a terrifying, barely contained fury. This was Wyatt. Behind him, 6 other Marines stepped out of the vehicles. They were not armed, but their sheer physical presence moving in tight, disciplined unison, was intimidating enough to stop traffic. They fell into a loose but purposeful formation behind Wyatt. Wyatt did not look at the coffee shop immediately. His sharp, predatory gaze swept the street until he locked eyes with the elderly man sitting on the bus stop bench. The furious tension in his jaw instantly softened, replaced by a flash of deep, agonizing concern. He broke into a heavy jog, his combat boots thudding against the pavement, closing the distance between the cafe and the bus stop in seconds. "Grandpa," Wyatt said, his booming voice dropping an octave as he knelt on the scorching concrete right in front of Harrison. He placed a massive hand on the old man's trembling shoulder, ignoring the heat radiating from the ground. "Are you all right? You're pale. We got the medical kit in the truck." Harrison offered a weak, trembling smile, his hand resting on Duke's head. "I am perfectly fine, Wyatt. Just a little low on the sugar and a bit too much sun. But I survived worse in the jungle, I assure you." Wyatt's jaw tightened again. He looked at the plastic cup of water and the empty ceramic bowl at Duke's feet, then shifted his intense, dark gaze to Hannah. She shrunk back slightly against the metal bench, intimidated by the sheer size and intensity of the man. "And who is this?" Wyatt asked, his voice firm but surprisingly gentle when addressing her. "This is Hannah," Harrison said, his voice regaining a fraction of its former gravelly strength. "She was the only person in that entire establishment who remembered what human decency looks like. She gave me water. She gave Duke water. And the manager, a dreadful little tyrant named Gregory, fired her on the spot for it." Wyatt slowly stood up. He looked at Hannah, his eyes studying her tear-stained face, her discarded barista uniform shirt, and the sheer panic radiating from her posture. "You lost your job to help my grandfather?" he asked, his voice low. He was going to pass out," Hannah stammered, wrapping her arms around herself. "He's an elderly man with a medical service dog. It was illegal to throw him out. I couldn't just stand there and let Gregory treat him like dirt. I am a nursing student. I know what a hypoglycemic crash looks like. I just wanted to help him." Wyatt took a deep breath. His broad chest expanded, and when he exhaled, the brief moment of gentleness vanished entirely. The terrifying carved from granite marine returned, and his eyes locked onto the tinted glass windows of the Sapphire Brew. "Men!" Wyatt barked over his shoulder. The 6 Marines behind him straightened instantly, their posture rigid. My grandfather, General Harrison Montgomery, was just denied a basic human necessity and illegally ejected from a public establishment because of his service animal. The civilian who attempted to render aid was unjustly terminated. Hannah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. General Shi looked down at the frail old man sitting next to her. Harrison gave her a slow, knowing wink. He wasn't just a veteran. He was a retired general. "We are going inside," Wyatt continued, his voice cold and sharp enough to cut through steel. "We are going to have a very polite, very direct conversation with the management about the Americans with Disabilities Act and about the respect owed to those who built the very freedoms they enjoy. Fall in." "Ura," the men responded in unison, a low, guttural bark that sent a shiver down Hannah's spine. Wyatt turned back to his grandfather. "Stay here in the shade, Grandpa. I will handle this." "Actually, Wyatt," Harrison said slowly, pushing himself up from the bench, using his cane for leverage. "I believe I have recovered enough to accompany you. I wouldn't want to miss Gregory's face when he realizes who owns the building his little coffee shop is leasing." Hannah felt her knees go weak. The twists were piling up faster than she could process. Not only was the frail old man a retired military general, but he was also the landlord. "Hannah, my dear," Harrison said, offering his arm to her once again. Would you care to join us? I believe you have some back wages to collect and an apology to receive." Wiping the last of her tears away, a slow, triumphant smile spread across Hannah's face. She stood up, taking the General's arm. "I would love nothing more, sir." With Duke leading the way, his tail wagging slightly, the unlikely procession marched back down the sidewalk. Wyatt and his squad of Marines flanked them like a heavily armored honor guard. The street had gone completely silent. People stopped their cars. Pedestrians filmed on their phones. Inside the Sapphire Brew, Gregory was standing behind the mahogany counter, berating a new barista for frothing the milk at the wrong angle. The cafe was still packed, the wealthy clientele sipping their expensive drinks, oblivious to the storm gathering right outside the glass. Then the heavy glass doors didn't just chime. They flew open with a violent crash. The sound of the heavy glass doors hitting the doorstops echoed like a gunshot through the upscale cafe. The low hum of wealthy corporate chatter died instantly. Every single executive, every banker, and every patron froze their coffee cups, suspended in mid-air. Lieutenant Colonel Wyatt stepped into the pristine, amber-lit room. He did not walk. He invaded the space. The 6 Marines filed in right behind him, forming a solid wall of olive-green fabric and intimidating muscle that completely blocked the exit. The sheer, overwhelming presence of the military men made the upscale coffee shop feel incredibly small and suffocatingly tense. Then, parting the wall of Marines, walked General Harrison Montgomery, leaning heavily on his wooden cane, with Hannah holding his arm, and Duke, the service dog, padding softly at his side. Gregory, standing behind the mahogany counter, dropped the metal milk pitcher he was holding. It clattered loudly onto the polished floor, spilling white foam across his expensive leather shoes. The smug, tyrannical arrogance that had defined his face for years instantly melted away, replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. He looked at the towering Marines, then down at the old man he had so callously thrown into the heat just 15 minutes prior. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Gregory stammered, his voice cracking, completely devoid of its usual venomous authority. Wyatt ignored him. He marched straight up to the counter, his heavy boots echoing like drumbeats against the marble floor. He stopped an inch away from the register, towering over Gregory. "Are you the manager of this establishment?" Wyatt demanded, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I am Gregory. I am the manager," he squeaked, shrinking back against the espresso machines. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Wyatt Montgomery." Wyatt stated loudly, ensuring every single patron in the cafe heard him. "You just threw my grandfather out into the extreme heat because of his medical service dog. You violated federal law, Gregory. You endangered the life of an elderly, decorated war veteran. And to make matters worse, you fired the only employee in this building who possessed a shred of moral courage." The entire cafe gasped collectively. Several businessmen in the corner booths glared at Gregory, shaking their heads in disgust. "It was a misunderstanding." Gregory pleaded his face, turning entirely pale. He raised his hands defensively. "I did not know he was a veteran. The dog was shedding, and we have strict health codes." "Do not lie to me," Wyatt interrupted, slamming his massive hand onto the mahogany counter. The wood literally groaned under the impact, and Gregory jumped back in fright. "Federal law supersedes your pathetic health codes. And you did know he was a veteran because he was wearing his service jacket." General Harrison stepped forward, releasing Hannah's arm. He moved slowly, but there was a commanding, terrifying aura surrounding him that made the entire room hold its breath. "You were very concerned about the aesthetics of your premium establishment," Gregory Harrison said, his gravelly voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "You said I was a vagrant. You said my dog was filthy." "Sir, please, I apologize." Gregory begged, sweat pouring down his forehead. "I was stressed." "Save it," Harrison said coldly. I do not care about your apologies. I care about actions. You run this coffee shop under a lease agreement with Montgomery Commercial Real Estate, do you not? Gregory's eyes widened to the size of saucers, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Yes. We lease from Montgomery. His voice trailed off as the catastrophic realization hit him. He looked at the old man, then at Wyatt Montgomery, and finally back at the old man. I am the founder and primary shareholder of Montgomery Commercial Real Estate, Harrison stated, leaning heavily on his cane, but standing taller than he had all day. I own this building, Gregory. I own the ground you are standing on. And as of this exact moment, I am exercising the morality clause in your lease agreement. Your tenancy is hereby terminated. The cafe erupted in hushed whispers. Gregory grabbed the edge of the counter, looking as though he was about to pass out. You cannot do that. I have rights. You broke federal law, Harrison replied calmly. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate this property, or my grandson will help pack your machines. Gregory opened his mouth, but Wyatt stepped forward. The Marines shifted their weight. Yes, Gregory whispered. I understand. Harrison turned to the patrons. This cafe is closed. Finish your drinks and have a wonderful day. Wyatt handed Hannah a business card. My grandfather runs a foundation for veterans. We need dedicated nurses. Full tuition reimbursement. Hannah smiled, hugging Duke tightly, stepping toward her future. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness requires the greatest courage, and standing up to a tyrant can cost you everything. But Hannah learned that true integrity never goes unrewarded, especially when you protect those who protected us. If this dramatic tale of instant karma justice and the unstoppable bond between a military family and their heroes moved, you please hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more touching stories.